You ever notice something strange about Generation X? We talk constantly about boomers. We analyze millennials. And right now, everyone seems fascinated with Gen Z. But there's one generation that often gets ignored. Generation X. Born roughly between 1965 and 1980, they're the quiet middle generation. They don't dominate headlines. They don't flood social media with opinions. And yet, their psychology might be one of the most unique of all. To understand Generation X, you have to understand the world they grew up in. Picture this. It's the late 70s. A kid walks home from school. They unlock the front door, and the house is empty. No parents. No smartphones. No cameras watching the front door. Just silence. For millions of Gen X kids, this wasn't unusual. They were known as the Latchkey generation. Children who came home to empty houses because both parents were working. And something interesting happens psychologically when you grow up like that. You learn independence early. You learn how to solve problems yourself. You learn that sometimes no one is coming to fix things for you. That kind of childhood builds a very specific mindset, self-reliance. But Generation X also grew up during something else, uncertainty. They watched the Cold War dominate the news. They saw political scandals like Watergate. They watched divorce rates rise dramatically across the 1970s and 80s. And they witnessed something that shaped their psychology deeply, institutions failing. Governments failing, corporations laying people off after decades of loyalty. The message they heard growing up was simple. Work hard, follow the rules, everything will work out. But Generation X watched that promise break over and over again. So their psychology adapted. Instead of trusting systems blindly, Generation X learned to trust themselves. That's why many Gen X individuals value competence over titles. They respect skill, not authority. And that attitude shows up everywhere in their behavior. At work, Gen X tends to be extremely independent. They don't usually ask for constant feedback. They don't expect hand-holding. They just figure things out. But here's the paradox. Despite being extremely independent, Generation X is also incredibly loyal to people they trust. Not companies, not institutions, but people. Close friends, family, small trusted circles. Because growing up as latchkey kids taught them something important. If you want support, build your own network. Another interesting trait? Privacy. Generation X grew up in a world before social media, when embarrassing moments didn't go viral, when mistakes didn't live forever online. And because of that, many Gen X adults still value something that younger generations often struggle with: being invisible. They don't always feel the need to broadcast their lives. They don't document every moment. In fact, many of them prefer staying out of the spotlight completely. Which is one reason Generation X often feels overlooked. They're not loud. They're not constantly posting. They're just quietly doing the work. But here's where their psychology becomes fascinating. Generation X grew up at a very specific moment in history. They experienced the analog world as children and the digital world as adults. They remember using payphones, but they also helped build the internet economy. They remember researching information in libraries, but they adapted quickly when Google changed everything. In psychology, this kind of adaptability is extremely powerful because it means your brain learns how to function in multiple environments. Gen X understands both worlds, the slow world and the fast one. And that might be their greatest strength. They are the bridge generation between analog and digital, between old systems and new ones. And because of that, Generation X developed a mindset that psychologists often describe as pragmatic realism. They're not overly optimistic, but they're not cynical either. They simply assume that the world is unpredictable and prepare themselves accordingly. Which might explain something interesting. When crises happen, Generation X tends to stay surprisingly calm. Economic downturns, corporate layoffs, technology disruptions. They've seen it before. They expect instability. And psychologically, expecting chaos can make you more resilient to it. But here's the irony. Despite their resilience, Generation X often receives the least recognition. Boomers built many institutions. Millennials reshaped the workplace. Gen Z is redefining culture. But Generation X? They quietly held everything together in the middle, raising families, adapting to technological revolutions, navigating economic crises, without much attention, without much noise, just doing the work. And maybe that's the most Generation X trait of all. They never needed the spotlight, because their psychology was shaped by something deeper: self-reliance, adaptability, and the quiet confidence that comes from learning to figure things out on your own. So the next time someone talks about generations, don't forget the one in the middle. The generation that grew up alone, learned independence early, and quietly became one of the most adaptable groups in modern history. Generation X. If you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind human behavior, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.